Well, the poem starts with these lines about single-celled organisms,
Hmm.
the very first life on Earth, and how they reproduced. It was basically just splitting themselves in two. Like, that's
Yeah,
it.
like binary fission.
Exactly. So in a way, they were like the ultimate unpaired beings. They didn't need anyone else to make more of themselves. But then the poem jumps to the evolution of multicellular life, organisms made up of many cells working together.
Okay.
And it kind of presents this transition as like a trade-off.
Hmm. A trade-off.
Yeah. Like individual cells had to give up some of their independence in order to be part of something bigger.
Ah, I see. It's like they were unpaired, but then they had to pair up in a way to form these complex organisms.
Exactly. And the poem really highlights this tension between the needs of the individual cell and the needs of the whole organism.
Fascinating. So how does the poem explore this tension?
Well, well, it allows them to mix up their genes more effectively. And that makes their offspring, their seeds, more resilient to changes in the environment.
It's like they're hedging their bets, so to speak, mixing things up to increase the chances of survival.
Exactly. And the poem uses this word, complicity.
Complicity.
Yeah, it's talking about how plants rely on other forces to reproduce,
Hmm.
like insects, wind, even sometimes trickery to spread their pollen around.
Ah, I get it. It's like they're in cahoots with these other players in the environment.
Right. And the poem calls these things, like the colors of flowers, the scents, the shapes.
Sensory cues.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even though a plant might be rooted in one spot, it's still part of this intricate web of relationships. And a lot of those relationships, they involve some kind of pairing, even if it's with a completely different species.
Hmm. That makes sense. So we've got these single-celled organisms that are perfectly unpaired, and then plants that are kind of in between. What about animals? Where do they fit in?
Right. Well, the poem contrasts plant reproduction with animal reproduction. You know how plants can produce a ton of seeds, like a crazy amount.
Yeah.
Animals, on the other hand, they're usually limited by how many offspring they can carry or care for at once.
Right. There are those limitations.
So the poem presents these as like two different approaches to being unpaired, I guess you could say.
Interesting. So, like, plants are unpaired in the sense that they can spread their genes far. Animals, where do they fit in?
Right. Well, the poem contrasts plant reproduction with animal reproduction. You know how plants can produce a ton of seeds, like a crazy amount.
Yeah.
Animals, on the other hand, they're usually limited by how many offspring they can carry or care for at once.
Right. There are those limitations.
So the poem presents these as like two different approaches to being unpaired, I guess you could say.
Interesting. So, like, plants are unpaired in the sense that they can spread their genes far and wide, relying on sheer numbers.
Right, right.
But animals, they're unpaired in a different way, maybe, because they invest more heavily in each individual offspring.
Yeah, that's it. And the poem doesn't say that one approach is better than the other. It just presents this beautiful diversity.
Which is kind of the whole point of evolution, right? It's about finding different solutions to the same problem, survival.
Absolutely. And this is where the poem takes this really interesting turn. It moves away from the mechanics of reproduction, like the biology of it all, and it starts talking about the emotional aspect of being unpaired.
The emotional aspect.
Yeah. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. Like there's this sense of longing, of searching for connection, but also a kind of acceptance of being alone.
Huh. That's pretty profound for a poem about, pollen and seeds and stuff.
I know, right? And it made me wonder, like, what if we're thinking about being unpaired all wrong? What if it's not a failure or a deficiency, but just another way of being in the world, another outcome of this grand evolutionary experiment?
Yeah, I see what you mean. The poem seems to be saying that maybe we shouldn't judge being unpaired so harshly, that it's just another part of the natural order.
Exactly. And, there are all these examples in nature of species that thrive even though they don't reproduce in the traditional sense. Like some animals help raise their siblings' offspring, or they play these crucial roles in their communities even if they don't have their own kids.
Right, right. They're still contributing to the survival of their genes, just in a different way.
It's like the poem is challenging us to expand our definition of success, to look beyond just having offspring as the only way to make a meaningful contribution to life.
I love that. It's a really powerful message. And it makes you think, doesn't it? Like, maybe we put too much emphasis on being paired up. Maybe there's more to life than just finding a mate and settling down.
Right. And that's what I love about this poem, Unpaired. It takes this biological concept, reproduction, and it weaves it into this broader reflection on life, on connection, on finding your place in the world, whether you're paired or unpaired. It's really made me question some of my own assumptions. So I guess the question for all of us listening is, what does being unpaired mean to you? And how can we create a world that celebrates all the different ways of being, all the different ways of contributing to the tapestry of life?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. Really thought-provoking.